Soviet Union as a stable society, and this actually contributed to keeping the Cold War cold, but not hot. But what was an absolutely unique feature of the Harvard project is its conduct at the grassroots levels. The data collection stage was in fact a year-long fieldwork reserved for the interviewing of Soviet refugees in Western Europe and the United States. And there were two groups for this task. One is Munich-based and the other is New York-based, consisting of a field director and interviewers and the contact man. The contact institution and the contact man approached various displaced persons and conducted 2 or 3 day oral interviews and then written questionnaires. But the most surprising fact, however, is that neither Parsons, nor Clapham, nor Inkeles ever participated in the fieldwork in person. Baumer was a Munich team field director solving rather administrative problems. So the main question is who collected this data? So who created the database, which was actually the milestone of the Soviet studies for the whole decades before the breakdown of the Soviet Union. And what did the field work changed in Cold War knowledge production as well as in early Cold War policy? And I would like to trace the possible avenues of those changes using the Ukrainian-Russian rivalry as my point of departure, since together the two national groups made up about 80% of respondents. And I will try to show that a new type, a hybrid scholar, emerged in Soviet studies in this period. At the very beginning of the project, the national questions were excluded in the list. But the concept of what the national question was, what kind of relationships between various nationalities in the Soviet Union prevailed, was rather vague. One source of intellectual inspiration was works by George Vernadsky, in which he stated that the Russians, as a Slavonic people, are divided into 3 major branches: the Great Russians, the Ukrainians, and the White Russians or Yellow Russians. With these assumptions in their minds, and without any clear idea of who would be able to tackle the sensitive questions, in April 1950, Alex Inkeles started searching for potential candidates. There was a set of criteria that reflected the project leader's image of the ideal Soviet academic expert: native or close to native Russian, scholarly credentials, MA or PhD degrees from American or at least Western European universities, deep expertise in region, and no involvement in any organizations. To meet all of the requirements was an extremely difficult task, since even the project chiefs possessed only 2 out of 4 above-mentioned merits: the academic positions and loyalty to the United States. The decision was taken to involve native representatives of the region or American-born individuals with appropriate background, and biographies of those people were subject to the closest examination, as well as a careful self-narration in order to keep all criteria in a constant balance. And if we look at the profile of top executives of the project, so it's rather boring. So all of them are men, all of them had a PhD, mostly from American universities. None of them have any connections with the region, like no parents from this region, or no other cultural sentiments. And all of them proceeded in their career as academicians. But if we look at the profile of fieldwork participants, it's much more diverse. And what is most important is that almost 60% of them had some origin from the region, like their parents or some, or they were born in Russia or in the Russian Empire or in the Soviet Union and so on. But soon after the selection of interviewers started, the project leaders realized that in practice it was rather impossible to meet all four requirements. And moreover, on the political side, sometimes it was even harmful. Why? In the early 1950s, the American political circles and the CIA cherished the idea to unite all Russian and non-Russian emigre political parties under the leadership of Russian leftists, Mensheviks and Social Democrats. In 1949, with the strong financial support of the CIA Initiative, American Committee for Liberation of the Peoples of Russia, those groups formed the League of Struggle for People's Freedom, headed by the former head of the provisional government, Alexander Kerensky. Two Russian leading Mensheviks, the journalist David Dalin and the historian Boris Nikolayevsky, did a separate project on Soviet camps using displaced persons' testimonies. Nikolayevsky was invited to the Russian Research Center seminar to give a talk on displaced persons, and in 1949, and then he helped approach various displaced persons communities in Belgium as well as immigrant organizations in Europe. From the perspective of their favorable political affiliation and personal experiences, Stalin and Nikolayevsky were quite welcomed as a project contact man. Russian Mensheviks, however, insisted that the Russian sphere embraces the whole of the three Russian nationalities, Great Russians, Ukrainians, and Belarusians, and any attempt to deprive Russia of any part of her national territories bears the seeds of new conflicts. For David Dalin's son, the PhD student at Columbia, Alexander Dalin, the future Columbia and Stanford professor and really Soviet studies superstar, a wide network of acquaintances he possessed in Russian emigre circles was rather a considerable advantage while applying for a position of a project interviewer. Born in Berlin, he fled the Nazis and moved to the United States. In 1943-46, he served in the US Army's Military Intelligence Division, interrogating prisoners of war. And Alexander Dalin was granted the most sensitive topic of the project, study of the German occupation, which meant that in practice he started collaborations with the Nazis. Alexander Dalin conducted more than 30 interviews and then used them in his most famous and still relevant book, German Rule in Russia, 1941-45, but his personal strategy as a Soviet expert with mixed hybrid identity may be described as alienation. He seems to abandon both a potential successful career in Russian emigre political milieu and his cultural sentiments in favor of pursuing the reputation of the ideal Soviet academic expert, with no doubt to whom he was loyal. In his letters sent to both Inkeles and Bauer, this 26-year-old young man ironically called all displaced persons he contacted as our guinea pigs. The other project famous associate, George Fisher, who did all organizational work in Munich before the team came, represents the second strategy, the double consciousness. He was the son of the famous American left journalist Louis Fisher, but grew up in the Soviet Union, was active in the Komsomol, and even led a delegation presented to Stalin. His father helped him to migrate to the United States, where George was a PhD student in Russian history at Harvard, working with the historian Mikhail Kharkovich. There he developed his American academic identity and attained the image of the ideal, disinterested scholar under the name of George Fisher. But for the Vlasov and Russian emigre circles, he was rather Yuri Lvovich Fisher. Yuri Lvovich Fisher had close relations with Boris Nikolayevsky, with Boris Yakovlev, an ex-Soviet scholar, the former vice president of the Soviet Academy of Architecture, then a Rosenberg propagandist friend, thank you, who led the Vlasov-oriented and very political party, the Union of Struggle for the Liberation of the Peoples of Russia. Fisher decided to have Boris Yakovlev and his Russian library as the only mediating organization between the project and the peace. And in 1950, the Russian library was transformed into the Institute for the Study of the History and Culture of the USSR, the future main European academic institution for delivering anti-communist messages. Yakovlev was asked to approach every important anywhere political party, but he was certainly not the right kind of person for such a task. And as a result, the founding members of the Institute were representatives of those Russian politicians that were close to Glasnost movement, consisted of the former Soviets who had collaborated with the Nazis against the Soviet Union. Actively involved in Russian and political life, officially the Munich Institute was an academic institution with the ambition to represent ex-Soviet scholars of all nationalities. It was a buffer, a place in betweenness for those who had some valuable expert knowledge of the Soviet Union and loyalty to the United States, but who could not enjoy possessing American or Western European university credentials. In other words, some of the examined received an opportunity to turn into experts, even if their social status was rather a half scholar, a supply of raw data that needed the further interpretation by true academicians. Then, at the other end, the third participant, John Reshetar, who was responsible for nationalities problems in the Soviet Union, represents the third possible personal strategy conversion. He was an American-born political scientist with some Ukrainian, or so to say, Carpathian Ukrainian or Mother Russian background, and his recommender has the following assurance: Reshetar has absolutely no political or other affiliations with Ukrainian parties, and this is the main difficulty to find a right kind of person with Ukrainian background, and in that respect you can rely upon his objectivity. But in Munich, Reshetar managed to win confidence of the Ukrainian Free University, one of the most important Ukrainian scholarly emigre centers in Germany at the time. And when the decision was made to administer written questionnaires on nationality problems, which was to be administered only among Ukrainians, Reshetar decided to cooperate with the Ukrainian Free University, but the other project members were extremely reluctant. Reshetar showed the draft questionnaire to somebody at the university, at the Ukrainian University, and it caused a great scandal. And there are some questions from this very ambitious questionnaire. And Reshetar supported Ukrainians in their attempt to be equal, respected partners in shaping the research agenda of the project. And Reshetar's conversion from the disinterested and not a nationalist American scholar into a person who was able to sacrifice an academically perfect questionnaire in favor of one national academic interest was very unwelcome by his colleagues. But actually he persisted in his opinion on nationalities biases in the Soviet Union for his entire academic career. And to sum up, the strong reactions of Ukrainian political and cultural communities, however, made the American government experts revisit the concepts of Russia and the Soviet Union at the beginning purely because of political reasons. In 1953, the American Committee for Liberation of the Peoples of Russia became the American Committee for Liberation from Bolshevism, and the CIA gave up the idea to unite all emigrant political groups under the leadership of Russian Social Democrats, adopting instead the principle of national particularism, and the huge portion of money went to those Ukrainian groups who just recently had been the most vehement critics of the Harvard Project. And in general, the Harvard Project fieldwork resulted that both Ukrainian and Russian emigrant political parties strengthened their role as an important actors of the Cold War policy, whereas for Ukrainian scholarly communities, the effect was rather damaging, Ukrainian professors decided to preserve Ukrainian language scholarly traditions instead of integrating themselves into English language academia, and it resulted in the ghettoization of American Ukrainian studies for several decades. The attempt to utilize the escapist expertise has changed the institutional composition of American academia. Mass involvement of the native representatives of the region or American-born individuals with appropriate background in American academic life engendered hybridization of national and social identities. Early Soviet studies needed such hybrids badly for its efficient functioning. Such a special type of a scholar, a mediator across the borders, served as a translator of knowledge from one system into another. And any attempt to assign them to only one of the communities oversimplifies the picture considerably. And as we see from the biographies of three leading fieldwork figures, their identities were highly dynamic, allowing them to be a perfectly American scholar one day and a contributor to the emigrant community life the next. And boundaries between the academic and the non-academic worlds were challenged by the existence of semi-academic or interstitial enterprises. And they were mostly staffed by emigre scholars who were expected to perform public educational and propagandistic functions more willingly. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I have one question and one criticism. The question is, did I understand you correctly that in this project they interviewed primarily displaced Russians or Soviet citizens?
Yeah, Soviets.
So not refugees. Because at the same time, there was another project which did interviews with refugees from Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, and so on. And the researchers collaborated a little bit with the other project. And the main, and it was the same, the fieldwork was done by someone, and the analysis was done by Siegfried Krakauer, a relatively famous German scholar, and he published the results in the middle of the 50s. So that's the question. My criticism is your usage of this hybridization. Why not using this old-style terminology of roles? So, for example, this a role, and you can take more than one role, and then you have to balance your roles, but there is no need to develop one identity. And this would be much more appropriate, in particular, to those people with a very diverse biography, like the George Fisher. But
Thank you. And what was the year of this other project?
They did the first round of interviews in 49 and the second round in 51, and Krakauer published the book in 55 or 56. It's Satellite Mentality. It was done under the auspices of the Bureau of Applied Social Studies, but we can talk later.
What questions again?
I think I'm referring to the Columbia refugee project because this was after refugee refugees. And in this project, there is a kind of further flexibility of the scholars who are doing that because they gather all this amount of data and they realize that they cannot use this data because the epistemic framework is that of a system and it has no particular factors and character factors. So they wanted to analyze basically the allegiances to communism and the system of loyalty, but they were not identifying the character factors for that. So it was kind of a big data project which very much resonates with nowadays project without any kind of specific direction in mind. And it was also because of the collaboration with the military. And also the hours work, which was never used after they published these books, and these books are lying in everybody's library, nobody reads them. And also we know that Harvard invested a lot of money, even after this complete failure, to digitize this archive. And then who is using this archive nowadays? If it was not used even at that time, you know? So why are we having this project in the end? Then and now as well. And who is using this data?
Thank you.
Thank you. If no more questions, please.
So thank you very much for your comments, and if I may combine your questions about the other projects which collected the data on the Soviet refugees, or generally on the refugees from the communist countries. So the first one, of course, the Harvard project was not the first project to do this, and you're absolutely right that there was a one done by Columbia scholars and the Bureau of the Applied Social Sciences, and they wanted, but the main idea of that project was to make some working questionnaire the most effective one to extract this knowledge from the soil. So the idea of this Bureau of the Applied Social Sciences was rather sociologically or methodologically oriented. The other project was done by the University of Michigan, and again it was a preliminary testing of this methodologies, and the people from the U.S. Air Forces who actually wanted and who commissioned the Harvard this project for Harvard scholars, they used this data from the Columbia and from the Michigan, but they were not satisfied with this data, and they decided to have Harvard scholars with their, so to say, the strong methodology of Talcott Parsons and Clive Clarkson, this functionalist and structuralist analysis of all these societies with depersonalizing agenda, so to say. And we have the other project, for example, after the Hungarian Revolution, so the same project, more or less the same project, and done by Columbia scholars, using the experience of the Harvard scholars, again to collect some information from the Hungarian refugees who escaped the country after the revolution failed. But here I would like to stress the two separate issues. The one issue is the usage of data by Harvard top executives like Clarkson, like Bauer, like Parsons, and you're absolutely right that to their measure volumes, the Soviet citizen and how the Soviet system works, they were not really welcomed by their colleagues, because it was rather like some abstract social forces that they were important in the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union was presented as a very stable society, with no important tensions and so on. But my idea was using this fieldwork data to show why these sources were so unreliable concerning the tensions in the Soviet Union. Yes, because one of political groups from immigrants using, so to say, these scholars between the borders, the translator of knowledge, managed to influence the results and the kind of data that the Harvard top executives received. And the other people from these communities who were unsatisfied with these results, Russian immigrant parties, and non-Russian communities, they tried to influence somehow indirectly through the media coverage, through forging, so to say, the public opinion, to shape, to contribute to this research agenda. But actually, they failed mostly. Yeah? And it's the other story, like it's a greater story why. And this context institution, so the Institute for the Research of the History and Culture of the Soviet Union, which was staffed mainly by leftist Russian immigrant parties. So they actually presented their narrative, their view on the Soviet Union. But so the other question about these raw materials, these data that were digitalized and preserved, and now they are preserved at Harvard, and actually only oral interviews are preserved, so no written questionnaires were preserved. And for the decades, these data were used as the only available archive, so to say, as a substitute for Soviet archives to understand Soviet history. And if we look, for example, at the classical work by Chela Fitzpatrick on every dialect of the Soviet Union, this book is overfull of raw data from the Harvard project, these interviews, and people are still used to them. And the very interesting thing is that people who participate of the fieldwork, sorry.
1 minute, so can you finish?
The participants of the field work, that 60% of them proceeded in their academic career, so they were associate professor of American University. So they wrote their own scholarly works, like the Alexander Dalin or the German group, like the Barry Faison, who participated in the preliminary interviews, and whose book on how Russia is ruled, so the absolutely classical piece on the totalitarian approach. So mostly it relies on the interviews. And the same about George Fisher, the same about John Reschker, the same about Joseph Berliner, who is the founder of the, so to say, anthropology. So all of these works of people who actually were fieldwork participants, who speak, who interact with these people from the Soviet Union, their scholarship are of absolutely other quality. So they are full of agency, they are full of people, they are full of personal stories. And many of them contributed to the totalitarian paradigm as somehow to flash it with a sense of suffering, with a sense of victims. It was somehow to justify the other side of this theoretical, highly theoretical approach, a highly abstract one. Thank you.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. That's the end of the morning session, and we will have a late morning session later. So at 11:30 we will meet here. Okay.
And outside coffee and other pizza. Don't forget to go. Sorry,
már nem ültünk ki, hogy regisztráció.
Persze, érthető,
De...
teljesen. Köszönöm szépen.
A videót, ez a